Hi everyone, this is Elmer, and I'm here to introduce my project. This is going to be the final project of the entire program. Is what I'm shooting for, and it's going to be a wall-mounted LED sculpture that's going to be controlled by a Raspberry Pi, and I'm going to try to make it so it responds to sound, and it's going to kind of mimic a sort of a retro sci-fi computer console. But before we get into all that, let's talk about where all this started. This project blends my experience with colored LED lights, the historical use of them, old school sci-fi, and the artistic movements that are light-based. Growing up, I was in a lot of art classes, and a lot of my instructors were ex-hippies that were around during the psychedelic era, and they often talked about going to concerts where they had these visual effects that involved manipulating water and oil and different dyes, put on a clear piece of plastic on the overhead projector that was projected behind the band. And I always liked this, and it stuck with me. My next influence is from spending a lot of time in the remote desert at night. It's in what they call a dark sky area. There's a dark sky ordinance in San Bernardino where they just want everyone not to have a lot of bright lights outside, just to maintain the ability to see the stars late at night. So the people that live out there, they have the tendency to light their porches and their outside lights with colored LEDs just to maintain the dark skies. I also grew up watching a lot of sci-fi, old school sci-fi shows like Time Tunnel, Twilight Zone, Logan's Run, and The Old Land of the Lost. And a lot of that had a lot of influence on this project and also the art that I do. So one of the artists that I studied was Andy Watson, and he was the light person for Radiohead, but he came after other light artists that were around San Francisco in the late 60s, early 70s, like Glenn McKay and Tony Martin, who were creating light shows for both the Fillmore and the Longshoreman Hall. So digital technology eventually became part of the concert lighting experience. So Andy ended up working for Verilight for a little while, who were the experts at computer-controlled concert lighting. So Andy eventually left Verilight and ended up working for Radiohead, the band, and eventually became in charge of all of their lighting during their concerts. So when Watson started working with Radiohead didn't necessarily need a lot of movement and a lot of flashes and a lot of color change in their concert lighting. They wanted it more mellow and more ethereal, and Watson's style began to mimic that. This is a quote from Digital Design: A History text by Stephen J. Eskelsen. Watson layers fragmented and curved screens at oblique angles, then plays a mix of pre-recorded sequences and live video to create a matrix of sensory input. A viewer simultaneously sees the band members themselves and myriad layers of color, light, and video. Something of a synthetic effect is achieved, as the lighting is not just complementary spectacle, but an immersive world from which the music appears. The next artist I'm going to talk about is Christopher Shart, and he's known for being an LED artist from Burning Man. He started going to Burning Man in the late 90s, and by 2013, he started doing LED sculptures out there. The reason I gravitate towards him is he uses a lot of Raspberry Pis for his programming, and for my project, I'll just be using a single Raspberry Pi. The reason I picked these two artists is because they're both computer programmers, and they're both artists. And I was, for a period of time, I was a computer science major for about a year, and I enjoyed programming. I kind of abandoned it. I didn't think I'd ever go back to it, and since I've been working in this program, it's nice to revisit that. So the piece I'm working on is influenced by two other pieces I did when I was working towards my bachelor's. One is a globe that has a Raspberry Pi in it that's connected to some LED lights, and the lights are supposed to represent some sort of data. I don't remember what it was, but it was a data visualization class that we had to do this. And the other piece I did was just a wooden sculpture with some lights in it, and that was just from a basic sculpting class that I took. So in some ways I'm combining the two pieces, but in a different way. I won't be doing something as big as Chris Shart or Andy Watson does, but I want to create something I can hang on my wall that reminds me of that old school sci-fi. Peace!